to others to watch. So,
Sure.
on the topic of Red Master, so I've been talking with a lot of companies here
Yeah.
at KubeCon just to see like how they're handling their pipelines. And I mean, it's not completely shocking to find out that everyone has the same problem, obviously,
Right.
right? Like everyone has like a large test suite and very flaky tests. One discussion I had with one of the companies was very interesting, and I thought that made a lot of sense. What they do with tests that are flaky, they confirm that they are flaky. Once they're flaky, they move it out of the general test suite and
Yeah.
move it into a separate bucket that says flaky tests. And
Hmm.
they don't even run those flaky tests. It is up to the team then to create either a new test to replace
Hmm.
the flaky test, or they do integration tests specifically on the item that the flaky test is causing. And they're
Right.
saying that anything else they've tried, right? Like disciplining the
Hmm.
developers, automatically reverting, just deploying green pipelines, all of that shit at some point just collapsed under pressure,
Right.
right? The only thing that is working so far for them is just taking that immediate action of um, moving um, the thing into a flaky bucket and then
Right.
requiring a change, basically. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Hmm.
And I think in theory, it would resolve quite a lot of our problems as well if we do it that way.
Yeah. So I think we have that or had that where we had let me check if we actually still have that. There was a build called Flaky Tests or something where it like retried it a bunch of times, but it was allowed to fail. Yeah, Flaky examples check. Not 100% sure how it works. Um, so we have something in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
I very much agree. Like if there's a test that fails on master, like it fails one time and then it doesn't, it should be um, taken out or at least marked as pending. Um, the issue I can see there is that um, we could automate that, for example, where a
Mm-hmm.
system will periodically check that, blah blah blah. The problem is, I think once those tests are removed or marked as pending or whatever, um, there's no real incentive for people to fix that because in their mind, like, oh, my code is in master, my feature is done,
Mm-hmm.
and quality or delivery, they'll fix it, right? 'Cause quality is supposed to do the tests and blah blah blah, and of
Yep.
course, people say no, that's not supposed to be the way, and etc. But um, as long as basically if the feature itself stays, you have to start fighting to fix these extra things because people say like, oh yeah, the feature itself works, it's just a test. So
Right, but I think there is an incentive because we do have
right,
error budgets. So if something does get break and you
right,
have an issue assigned to your team to handle a spec that was removed
yeah,
because of its flakiness, and you have a failure, that automatically takes it out of your error budget.
right. So
So
we could yeah, have them affect the error budget. I think I wrote this in a comment somewhere of feature flex to Dylan. Said, yeah, I think maybe we should start doing something with error budgets instead of just recording them.
well, I
I don't,
mean,
but I
we're just figuring out how to record them still. So I think it's
sure.
fine to do it this way, and we can do something about them. But like one of the examples we could do something about the error budgets is this thing exactly.
Right. No, so that is uh put it this way, whatever we come up with, like recording and counting this towards your error budget, totally agree.
Hmm.
We should do that. Um, my concern is basically I don't want to end up with say 6 months from now we have this pile of like 500 flaky tests. Nobody has any fucking clue what they do or why they randomly fail whatsoever. And
Hmm.
then quality or some specific group of people has to solve that problem, and it's probably not the people who wrote the test.
Well, here's the thing. This is where you can also play with merge rights. So we
Right.
can define that you have a bucket of flaky tests. You need
Hmm.
to have the bucket. um, uh, at any time it needs to be this full, right? Like this is
Right.
the max you can have. If you don't have it, your team needs to go to additional approvals to get their things
Mhm.
merged. And
Right.
apart from having additional approvals, um, you can actually get things refused, as in
Right.
no one is going to merge your stuff. And
Right.
that is very, very aggressive,
Hmm.
but we need to be very aggressive. There
Right.
is no other way.
No, so that idea, like, earlier this week, I took another look at trying to get Danger to run for forks, and it's sort of related to this in the sense that as part of that, I try to figure out, okay, are there just any alternatives that work with a forking model?
Mm-hmm.
Because on some issue trackers from Danger, I saw like people have the same problem but with GitHub pull requests.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was reminded that what people do with Rust, for example, and some other projects, is they have a bot where they assign the merge request to that bot, and the bot will then keep rebasing until there are no conflicts and the pipeline screen, and then it will merge it. The underlying idea is that if you don't use merge commits, you can have more conflicts, so you just let a bot do all the rebasing. What you could do there is hook that into this system where the bot will say, I'm not going to merge this because you consumed your error budget. Because I think if you let that up to people, they're not going to check the documents, or
True,
I don't even know where we have the current number, like the current error budget recorded.
true.
Uh, and so you could do that. The thing is that it's the same with, this is why I didn't do with the Danger fork, because I'm like, oh yeah, we can do that. Like the idea I had was we just run like a periodic pipeline that goes through all forks and runs it. But then I realized like, oh crap, you have to start cloning every fork, release fetch it. I was like, fuck it.
So,
Um,
Yorick, now that you're talking about Danger Jam, I had
yeah,
another idea. I think we might have touched this at some point, but I can't remember right now. Um, we need to consider maybe building Danger into GitLab.
yeah,
Functionality of
right.
Danger. I don't think Danger, right?
Hmm.
But here's the thing. Um, I think we could get a sign off of some sort
Yeah.
to build it ourselves because doing that
Oh,
through
right.
product
Yeah.
or through other teams might be
Yeah,
more
so
time
there
consuming.
are like 5 issues of that actually.
Hmm.
One that dates back 2 years ago where Sitsa created an issue. There's some they sort of stack on each other. I think one issue is sort of a generic lint API where you can just have like I think it was like a message with like an indicator like red or green or something like that. Kind of similar to the security reports and the
Hmm.
JUnit output we have. And then there was a second one where I think people want like generic build output that will be posted as a comment or something. There were like a couple that sort of relate to each other, and then I had one where
Recently, right?
we spit out JSON and we turn it into comments, etc. um, I thought about that. I don't like the idea of posting comments because you have to create like
No.
a bot user and then you have to update the existing comments. So what I like this idea of, similar to the security report or whatever. It's just like a thing you click and it just lists all the offenses, and those might be markdown or whatever.
Yeah,
Because
and
then
that
maintaining the list is super easy. You just nuke
yep,
the existing list and there you
yep.
go.
And also you then can plug into the pipelines and say you can't merge a pipeline because you have offenses. So
Exactly.
so do you have
And
any idea how much work that would be?
so I don't remember exactly the issues. I think most of them were somewhat typical in the sense they describe the intent, not the implementation.
Hmm.
Um, The way I would probably see that is that you'd have one or more CI builds that write output in a particular format, whether that's a JSON file,
Hmm.
JUnit, or something else. I don't know. But it's important that they don't talk to the API because then it won't work for forks. Um, and so then you have CI, which once the build is done, it just checks, oh, does it have particular artifact file, for example? Oh, then we ingest that and we turn that into output. So that could be something like, oh, a build just write like lints.json in the root, or if that exists, we sort of import it with some basic sanity checks, and then when the pipeline is done, we display those results. And then you could allow perhaps markdown there, whatever. I think conceptually it's fairly easy. I just think you're gonna run into. So what I remember from reading, there were people saying like, "Oh yeah, we want this in a format that's supported by Jenkins by default, and not JUnit because fuck JUnit." And then other people say, "No, it has." Like basically, everybody's trying to think from their point of view. And I think that what happens is when we implement this in a particular way, we're going to spend like 3 weeks fighting with both
So
product people.
true, Yorick, but we also have to think about obviously our values, like how we actually
Right.
do things. So what I'm proposing here is maybe we wanna like we schedule this item for ourselves and work on this and
Right.
get to a situation where we can use it. I'm telling you right now that I had like last night I had a discussion with one of the customers where I explained what we are doing with the commit messages, with
Right.
like all of that stuff with danger, and he was like, "All right, awesome. Like, where do I enable that in GitLab?" I was like, "Oh, well, no, this
Exactly.
is a gem.
Right.
Oh shit, we need that functionality. Can we add that?"
Right.
So, like, there is an interest out there even for the very basic thing.
Right.
So let's talk about. I mean, I know that you're going on a vacation next week. But after you're back, maybe we can talk about like scoping this a bit and like
Right.
finding out like what can we do to satisfy the minimum of our requirements to handle master, and we should then go and implement it. Um,
Right.
you and Robert, I don't think that should be difficult to do.
No, and so the core, if we ignore basically all the haters,
Yeah.
uh, and all the bike shitting and whatever, so at the core, it's just you write to lints.json, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the format I had in mind was just very straightforward. It's like an array of objects. It's just a type, which is like, I guess, uh, warning, error, info, something like that, and a
Mm-hmm.
message. That message can be markdown, although we probably have to sanitize the crap out of it,
Mm-hmm.
so we don't get people doing funny XSS injections there. Um, and then just every time a build completes, that artifact is present, we ingest it and then display it. I think you can implement that basic idea in a couple of days.
Yep.
Probably most time will be spent fighting the front end code trying to get it to show properly.
I mean, obviously, we can
Um,
always like ask for some help from fronted. We like
of course.
I'm thinking about maybe like even having some person like part of their time dedicated to
Right.
delivery, like we have for other teams.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. With
um,
this, my idea was to sort of guerrilla implement. Like we basically built the back end with a shitty front end. Say here it is. Please approve the front end.
yeah, but that would then solve the problems we have with forks. It would solve the
Yeah.
problems of us having to like maintain something separate outside of GitLab. It would give
Right.
users some basic functionality that is freaking amazing.
Yeah, because
And
we can get rid of danger, which my biggest problem with danger is not just even the fork issue, but the fact that the code is just completely untestable. Because
yeah.
it's just like some random script and it evaluates in a weird context, and it means that if you require it, it's like everything's global and it starts
Hmm.
running. It's fucking awful.
Yeah.
Uh, and the second thing is we had a Philippa who for some Vue.js project for GitLab, they implemented similar rules with a project called commitlint,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
by default enforces conventional commit messages, which I fucking hate. But um, the problem there is that because they used a separate project, they couldn't use all the exact same rules,
Hmm.
and the output was kind of confusing. There's a point where it's like, okay, at the very least, these commit guidelines,
Hmm.
they need to move out of danger somehow.
Yep.
Um, and I think yeah, with this lint API, if it's very straightforward and it supports marketing, you can basically do whatever you want.
Yep.
You could even go as far as have test output at lint there, where they say like, oh, this test field, whatever. Um, and then yeah, if you make sure like, oh, if there's one or more lints of error, then you cannot merge. Then you can get a long way. The
Like
one
which,
thing there is though that we have some checks that check merge request data, like the title, for example. Yeah, you can get that. Yeah, you don't need an API token for that. That's public info. You can just grab that from the API. Yeah. Long story short, I think that would help a lot.
yeah, let's talk about that once you're back.
Yeah.
And I think with that, it would allow us to think about the first iteration of some rules to say like, okay, you have a flaky bucket right now,
Right.
flaky test buckets. If we add this rule to the repository, your team is no longer going to be able to merge without an additional approval, and that additional approver needs to sign off on your merging to master because your bucket is too full, or you broke master too many times, or something like that.
So that's an interesting, perhaps, because that's definitely one thing we need to do. What might be a simpler step is we have code coverage reporting in GitLab. We run it for every merge request. We could say like, hey, if with your merge request the code coverage drops below X, no merge. And the reason is like if you, the underlying idea is that if you have, let's say, 50% code coverage and there's a bunch of flaky tests, we remove those, your code coverage goes down, and effectively nothing at that point can be merged, unless something actually increases that code coverage again, by ideally fixing the flaky tests, which I think is probably easier to implement in the sense that we have the code coverage data there. So it's a matter of, oh, if we add a threshold per project, and if it's lower, then no merge. Probably people are not going to like it, but that's that way you sort of kill two birds. Oh no, wait, I'm not supposed to say that. It's not politically correct. Somewhere off topic, somewhere I read where people were trying to replace these sayings like killing two birds with one stone with the political correct versions, and it's just really silly. Anyway, you get two things there. Like one, by removing flaky tests, your code coverage goes down, and in theory, people will have to then fix that. Two, new merge requests that add code without tests will
automatically be.
Well, they won't necessarily automatically be rejected. Like if your threshold is 50%, you're currently at 60%, you add some changes that you might go to like 59 point whatever. You could maybe change it instead of like a minimum. It's, the increase of code coverage has to be 0 or greater. In other words, you do something with code coverage, make sure it never goes down, always up, or the same at the very least. That way, if somebody adds like 500 lines of Ruby code and no test, the system will say, no. And then I don't have to, like today, where I find the merge request where there's a bunch of helper code added and some JavaScript that sees as like no tests.
No. Yep.
And Sean said like, oh yeah, apparently I forgot blah blah blah. But if the system there says like, hey, your code coverage goes down 2%, fuck you.
Yep.
Then that would have.
There is no arguing basically then.
No, and it would remove the human error, and it would also remove the discussion.
Yep.
And so with that, I think it's nicer to enforce that code coverage stays the same or goes up versus a minimum. Because if you set a minimum, people are going to argue like, oh, the minimum should be 100%, but we cannot achieve that, so we set it to like 40%, and we'll always have more than that. So it basically becomes useless.
Yep.
Whereas if you say, oh, code coverage, let's see, cannot, basically code coverage cannot decrease. That's it. Simple. You probably have to mark it update. Maybe you can say like, oh, you can define a factor, as in it can not decrease more than X%, but frankly, for a first implementation, I would just say it cannot decrease.
Okay. And I think we have an idea there what we can do, and I don't think it's going to be, well, in any case, whatever we implement is going to take some time to implement. So might as well like try and do the product first and see how far
Yeah.
we get.
Yeah. So to
So I
also
think.
quickly check a merge request if this would even be feasible. Yeah. So we're coverage 79%, 79.13. Yeah. So you could basically say, oh, if it goes, um, if it's more than 1% less than the previous value or something, then
Mhm.
no merge. Um, yeah, something like that.
Cool. That sounds great.
Yeah, so we have the lint thing, the code coverage thing, the whole not merge into master when it's read. Well, you could do a bot, but I think GitLab should be able to do that. Like it's something so simple um, to implement in GitLab itself. It's kind of stupid to require people to write a bot 500 lines of code to do that. Um, uh, let's see what else would be beneficial. Yeah, so that's the less technical thing, and this is much more long term, is that we can do all of this, and we should, and it's good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but this is also why I started looking, for example, bugs per team, because there's always been this sort of meme like, oh, front end breaks everything, and or like people pointing at each other basically. Um, And it doesn't help that when I start digging through commits and merge requests, the pattern is sort of confirmed. Where it's like, oh, they add like 500 lines of JavaScript or Ruby for that matter. And oh, it's like 2 tests. Um, I think we need to start slowly looking at, okay, what can we do about sort of the human side of things? The people might be very tempted, like, oh, you need to punish people, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
But like, there's a simple one. Simple example, not a simple solution. We made some UI changes to project dashboards, and I was super annoyed that the clone button is now like 5 pixels to the left versus the rest. So it's like
Yep.
misaligned on the right. And I was like, "Urgh." But then I started looking, and I looked like, oh, there's this other button which has like a dashed outline instead of a fixed line. And I saw some people reported issues. Um, and so people see that, it's like, oh, GitLab breaks frontend all the time, blah, blah, blah. But I think the core problem is there that we don't really have tools for testing visual changes. Like
Correct.
you can
And
write a test, say like, oh,
Frontend
this
said that once too many times as well. Like they are aware of
sure.
that. Yeah.
No, exactly. And so because you can test that an element has a certain class or ID, but as far as I know, you cannot test that a certain CSS rules apply. Like our tools just don't support that. And what I'm reminded of is the Dolphin emulator for the Wii U. And what they did is to test graphical changes. They have a continuous integration where they basically take screenshots and they compare those with some algorithm to see how different they are.
Jakob Schatz made something like that, if I recall. I don't
Right,
know what's the status of that, honestly. But
right,
he had an implementation of that.
right. And so you could do, you get like a shit ton of screenshots depending on how fine grained you make it. But uh, it's either that or you have to somehow figure out how, with the browser API, you can retrieve the CSS rules applied to an element. Because then, for example, these buttons, you can say, oh, all these buttons in this area need a fixed line around them instead of dashes. Um, or screenshots or whatever. But either way, there's a distinct lack of tooling there. And I think, unfortunately, because this is a pretty difficult topic, nobody there has really any
Yep.
clue how to approach it. Um, but that's, yeah, I'm going off topic a bit here. But anyway,
No,
this, um,
but okay. I think we kind of had
mhm.
a good discussion here. I think we have some interesting ideas. Um, if you don't transfer this into an issue, I'll do it afterwards. I'll
Yeah, so
I'll
let me just quickly look up
I
those.
I do need to leave
Uh,
though because I
all
have a
right,
meeting in like a few minutes
sure.
here on site.
Yeah, for all
But
the lint stuff, there are issues. There's like a lot of them actually, because a lot of people want it. Um, so I think what I will do is probably tomorrow. I just want to dig through some numbers and see
Mm-hmm.
bad, how bad things really are. And then I have Monday until Thursday, I think. I can actually just probably on Monday just implement this, like without front end code. 'Cause
Yep.
conceptually it's not that difficult. And just see
You
like,
don't.
oh,
If you want to test, for sure, go for it. I don't
it will
think
be the
anything's gonna
implementation
happen.
with no tests whatsoever, right? It's just
Yeah,
to see
yeah.
does it even work.
Then raise an issue in the framework issue tracker
Mhm.
and like put all your data there, collect all
Yeah,
your data there, and please put all of the related issues there so we can
right,
estimate what kind of things we can actually cover and not cover.
right,
So,
sure,
so yeah, cool, awesome, Yorick. Thank you very much for your time,
sure.
and I'll